Dr. Wade Gilbert is an award-winning professor in the Department of Kinesiology at California State University, Fresno, California. As Human Kinetics Coach Education Advisor, the Coach Doc writes articles and conducts webinars on a variety of coaching issues. Wade is also the editor-in-chief of the International Sport Coaching Journal, published by Human Kinetics. Wade holds degrees in physical education, human kinetics, and education, and has taught and studied coaching at the University of Ottawa, UCLA, and now at Fresno State. Wade has more than 20 years of experience in conducting applied research with partners around the world, spanning all levels of competition, from youth leagues all the way up to the World Cup. He's widely published and is frequently invited to serve as a featured speaker at national and international events. Wade is also a regular contributor to coaching seminars for Olympic and national team coaches in the United States and Canada. Just recently, Wade was a keynote speaker at the Hockey Hall of Fame for an event held in conjunction with the World Cup of Hockey. With all of that, I introduce to you Dr. Wade Gilbert. Wade, it's all yours.
Thank you, Mark. Welcome, everyone. I'm excited and honored to have this opportunity to continue this webinar series with you, and thanks for tuning in. So we're on the third of our four-part series, and we're now at the point where we're going to look at what we can be doing at the end of a season to help maximize our program success and our success as a coach. I like to start with this quote from a legendary basketball coach, Morgan Wooten. You can see here it says, "A coach's job is not over when the season ends. It just changes." And I really like that mindset, what that represents. So often, we have typical things that we'll do at the end of a season to kind of wrap up a season, but it's really just a change in our work, not the end of our work, right? At least for the best coaches out there. And all of us will end our season somewhere along this continuum. And I put a couple examples from my world here out in California at the moment, where on one end, some of us will end our season on a high note with maybe a league championship or a title. Here you see an image of a high school coach that I've worked with at Fresno High School with two of his runners, cross-country runners. They just recently won the male and female individual titles. So obviously a real high note for that program and that team. On the other end of the continuum, here at Fresno State, we see with our football team having a very challenging year, ranked at the bottom or right near the bottom of all the teams in Division I football. And as a result, our head coach was recently dismissed. The team's currently at 1 win and 9 losses with 2 games left. So these are the two extremes, and there may be a chance that we'll end up at either one or both of those at some point across our career as coaches or working with coaches. But for most of us, we're going to end our season somewhere in the middle. We'll achieve some of our goals, and we'll miss some of our targets as well. So ending at that point, what do we do next? So the purpose of what I want to share with you today is to look at how we can assess and recognize our strengths as well as areas in need of improvement. So what are some of the things that effective coaches have done to build on their strengths and also close some of those gaps? And as I've done with the other webinars in this series, I'm really only able to share a few things with you. So in, say 20 minutes, what are a couple of things that we can share? And I encourage you to look at the full scale of what we've learned about what great coaches do with their programs at the end of the season. And you can see in this image here, we cover that material in chapters 10 and 11 of that book that's coming out. So I decided for today that we'd focus on 3 things: program evaluation, rituals and recognition strategies, and coach performance analysis. So we'll start with program evaluation. And you have an image here of a very successful coach at the moment, Guy Godowski, head hockey coach at Penn State, and has won National and Conference Coach of the Year awards. And this is an example of the types of things or areas maybe that he would want to ask about or look at the end of a season for him and his program. And you can see you have some of the usual things that you might think about in terms of personnel, fundraising, but there's also a wider range of topics that we'd want to address if we really want to continue to build a great program, right? So do our systems work? Are they appropriate? What about our philosophy? Also looking at daily practices, specific things. Do we design our practices in a way that are most effective? And of course, in school settings or school-based settings, we'd want to look at academic performance as well, right? So these are some examples of how a great coach kind of sets the stage for a meaningful and valuable way to evaluate their program at the end of a season. And I share this image here with you because I just wanted, again, to give you a sense of the range of tools and types of approaches that we can use when we get to that point in the season and we think about program evaluation. In the book, we highlight or we feature and borrow and adapt some tools that we found to be useful. And again, this is by no means all-encompassing, but it's an example that cuts across some of the different areas we'd want to address or at least think about on a regular basis. And I share these with you because when evaluation is such a loaded term, and this has come up in conversations that I've had with coaches all over the world and even just most recently at meetings last week. And I've yet to meet a coach or an athletic director who gets excited about evaluation. As soon as you mention the word evaluation, you see body language changes, people cross their arms, they just, evaluation. And I think we miss the boat because we make it a chore or something we can check off and say, yeah, we did an evaluation, file it, and move on. And it's not productive. It's not meaningful. So what we want to do is look at what are the best things to help us do something productive and positive to move forward, right? So more of a development activity as opposed to a judgment activity. And some of the things that other people have used in terms of looking at areas we might want to focus on for development at the end of our season. This is from a great resource for athletic directors and if you do this with their coaches. Some examples related to personnel, sport issues, staff feedback, ranking yourself. So this could be a tool that we could give to our athletes, for example, and looking at getting feedback from them on a wide range of things. So again, it's not necessarily quantifiable, and the goal is not to get a score with things like this. It's more to get meaningful feedback to help us close performance gaps and get better. And what I found to be helpful is when we should be doing this at the start of the year, not the end of the year, but preparing for the evaluation, we want to look at, you see, it's always a balance, right, between what are some of the considerations we'd have for program evaluation, namely, number one, what should we be evaluating? Number two, how are we going to get that information on those things? Number three, what are some tools we can use? And number four, how are we actually going to use that information? And then we have to balance that with things that relate specifically to our context and our program culture and our philosophy and our constraints, let's say. So what I found to be helpful when I work with programs is, we ask ourselves, are we, in our program evaluation system, are we addressing questions related to our core values? Are these the right core values? Are these still relevant? Are these really the things that matter still for us? Did we develop a trusting environment, because trust and cohesion are so important to being able to achieve our goals? Did we develop our athletes in a healthy and meaningful way? And then did we perform? Did we help our athletes perform? in lots of different ways, right? It could be on the field, in life skills. It could be academics. So it's always this balance between what are the questions we want to address, and then how are we going to do that in a meaningful and practical, that's the key, practical way. Here's an example of how we've done that with high school, and we've started to adapt this with other settings too. And here you see a scorecard. So we developed this with all 23 different sports that we've worked with at this particular school. And this is a scorecard that is meaningful for us in this context. And I was educated about this topic by someone much smarter than me on these things. He said, you know, you have to get away from using the term best practices. You're not trying to share or replicate best practices. You want to use best principles. So what I'm sharing with you here is not a best practice, it's more a best principle. So we use the principles that were shared on that previous slide of what should we be asking and what matters and how we're going to do it. And we came up with this strategy that works in this particular setting. So we have the scorecard, and you can see we've weighted 4 areas equally. We have participation, retention, engagement, and competitiveness. And each of these is weighted 25%, worth 2 points for each one of these. So it's an 8-point scorecard. Why 8 points? Well, in this particular context with this school, they have an 8-point rating scale for all their teachers and all their academic programs. So it doesn't make sense in that setting for us to go out and do something completely different. We want to make it fit in that context so we can compare math programs to water polo programs to science programs. These are all part of our curriculum. And we have here, you can see this particular sport program, we can track it year to year, and we can see that this program made progress. There's definitely, you know, for example, in participation, we exceeded our target, so they scored higher than 2.0. They actually had bonus points there. And in fact, when we do these and we look at this, we sit down and we review it with the coach and say, here, it's not subjective. It's here's what happened. Let's have an evidence-based discussion about it. And what's working really well, let's keep doing that and do more of that. And what maybe is holding us back from having an exceptional program every year and for every sport. Moving on to other things we'd want to do at the end of the season, in this case, rituals and recognition strategies. And every program I've been around, every team, every sport, they always have their own unique recognition strategies and rituals that they use at the end of the season, which are really important for sustaining and reinforcing that culture and the core values. And one that I really like, I picked up from Joe Ehrman, and I think it's more than having banquets, although we'll talk about that in a minute, but it's the way we end the season. You know, it's like ending a relationship in a sense, right? Or ending a partnership. So how do we end that experience? And for him, he's developed some really innovative, in my opinion, ways to help athletes process that end, that moment. And so for him, it's important to recognize not only the achievements, but the journey, the sacrifices, the growth, and also those who will follow in our footsteps, those who will inherit the program. And he has one that I want to share with you that I really thought was nice, what he calls the last practice ritual. And for the last practice ritual, what they do is they, after their final practice, and this is particularly powerful for seniors, that's the last time, for many of these kids in football, that, you know, most, I would say, that'll be the last time they ever suit up and play football again. So how do we help them process that? So after the practice, they shower and they change. The whole team comes out of the locker room then together in pairs. They walk out in pairs holding hands, seniors first. They do a tour of the school campus. So the coaches take the whole team on a tour of the school campus, and they pause and reflect at important places around the campus. It could be a bench, it could be a tree, it could be the quad, you know, places that have significance and meaning for that that experience that those student athletes had. And sometimes they'll have people share insights. So, for example, if there's a plaque commemorating an event, they'll have someone share some insights about that plaque. And so it's a way for them to process that moment. Then they walk over to the football field. The underclassmen circle the field and they remain silent. This isn't their moment. This is really for the seniors. And it gives the seniors a chance to make peace with the field. So they get to go on the field and they do whatever they feel they need to do. And he shares examples. Some do sprints. Some grab a piece of the turf. Some sit in the end zone. So it's very personal, but it's a chance for them to make peace with that ending. And then the seniors have their final huddle break on the field. So you think about, yes, this takes time. Yes, this takes effort. And definitely, yes, it's emotional. But this is a way to really reinforce the core values and recognize this experience that we shared together. Another example, a more obvious example that everyone seems to do, and again, it often turns into something we have to do as opposed to a way to really reinforce core values. But we want to use it as another teachable moment, right? It's another way to teach what matters to us here and reinforce that and recognize people. And there's endless possibilities for this. But a couple that I thought were kind of neat to share. Jeff Jansen does a lot of work with teams on building culture, and a couple that he shares I thought were nice. One is what he calls the Nails Award. So an award that's given out at the banquet to an athlete, teammate, who demonstrates the most mental toughness. And so they get recognized with the Toughest Nails Award. Another example would be the Glue Award, recognizing an athlete who shows the most concern and sacrifice for the team. In other words, the glue that holds the team together. And I like you, I've seen all kinds of examples of fun and silly ways to recognize teammates and seniors at the end of the season. But it's also important to have some really deeply meaningful recognitions that, again, reinforce our core values and what we stand for and what matters to us. And I thought this was really neat because I hadn't seen this before. Ralph Pym put this little book out called Perfect Phrases for Coaches. And at an end of season banquet, coaches will have to stand up and speak in some capacity. And that's a performance. Do we prepare for that performance, or do we show up and read a couple of comments or make a couple things up off the cuff? Even worse, right? So he shared some neat examples in there of how to prepare for that performance as a coach. And he gives these tips specifically when, writing out your speech in advance or what you want to say in advance. Can you personalize the comments? Can you practice your timing? Because that's something we see quite often, right? If you're unprepared and you show up at a banquet, especially when you have other speakers too, and everyone exceeds their time and it drags on, and then you lose that momentum and that energy. Don't force humor. Trying to be funny when maybe that's not your strength, or perhaps you think it's funny but it's embarrassing someone else, right? Keep it positive, and then write these things out in advance, or at least a draft, or some key points. Ideally, you practice this. Again, this is, you think of your end of season banquet like a competition, or like a match or a game. You have a game plan. Have you practiced it? Have you prepared for it? Because again, that might be the last experience that you have together as a team for many of these athletes. All right, the last thing I wanted to share in this brief webinar today is some insights on coach performance analysis. So this is the one that, if done at all, seems to be the area that is somewhat addressed. So the coach will get an evaluation, the AD will do it, or the coach will do some self-reflection, maybe fill out a form, gets filed, or maybe they talk about it and they move on. So let's look at how we can make that more meaningful. And just give you a moment to look at this. It's from Jeff Huber, 12-time Coach of the Year, now a college professor at Indiana University, Olympic coach too. Coach evaluation, what's that? In my 37 years of college coaching, I recall being formally evaluated once. Conducted by an administrator, never observed one of my practices, never sit in on a team meeting, never stopped by to see what I was doing when I wasn't coaching. And this is where the resentment comes in. And this is where I see norm, unfortunately, with coach evaluation is it's an afterthought or it's something we have to check off and say we did. And it's not a meaningful experience, and it turns in, not only is it not meaningful, it turns into something that creates resentment and frustration. How can we change that? So we start by asking as a coach, how do I know if I did a good job? I mean, very basic question. How do I know if I'm doing a good job? And to really be able to answer that question well, we need feedback from a lot of different people. We need lots of different sources of information. And I just threw out some examples here of potential sources of information, people who could help us answer that question. And my experience is, again, if it's done at all, it'll be something done by an administrator, or the coach may have a chance to do a self-evaluation. But what about all these other potential sources of information to help us understand if we're doing a good job? I mean, at minimum, should we not be asking our athletes for some feedback? This is supposed to be about them, right? So ideally, we want to create a system where at minimum we get feedback from athletes, coaches, and administrators. The three primary, you could argue the three primary stakeholders in this experience across any type of setting. I put AD, athletic director, but you know, if it's a non-school based environment, it could be club director or director of coaching, right? So some form of administrator, the coach, and the athlete at minimum. And here's an example of a type of feedback we can get from athletes. Asking them, this one here is specific to departing seniors. So the seniors on our team, ideally, I would think, would know our team and our culture and our coaching philosophy best. So they're a really rich source of information to help answer that question, did I do a good job? And Sabak and Sabak have a nice list of questions. These are just a few. They have many more. But you can see some of the questions here. Some obviously are emotional, some are very subjective, and that's okay. Again, it's not about judgment, it's about getting information to help us improve what we're doing and have informed discussions. Another example that we can see here, this is from a very successful high school and college coach, Pat Tyson, a cross-country running coach. And these are the types of questions he would ask. So we have an example of something we might ask our athletes. Here's an example of something we might ask ourselves. Again, just very open-ended. You know, what went right? What are some of the things we might want to look at? Did we peak at the right time? Scheduling, you know, was it too ambitious, too easy? So I thought these are nice examples of some of the types of questions we might want to ask as a coach, again, across any type of sport. And then lastly, we want to make sure that we don't get so focused on what went wrong, right? We want to look also at what went right. And some would argue only focus on this. And there's a whole movement in positive psychology related to strength spotting or strength finding. And, you know, here's an example from a very successful coach, Augie Garrido. You know, a quote from him: why not focus on strengths instead of weaknesses? Build momentum. Build on what comes naturally to you. So definitely we want to build on our strengths. But I wouldn't do it to the extreme where we ignore things that didn't go well. But definitely we want to get both in there. And there's a lot of resources emerging in this area for coaches, and I see this increasingly being used in lots of different sport contexts. You can see, I just put a few examples. The Strengths Finders, when you buy that book from Gallup, you actually get access to a questionnaire that addresses 177 different statements and 34 strengths. So that's something I've seen athletes and coaches use. The CAP, which is the Center for Applied Positive Psychology, if you go to that website, it's actually it's a pay website, but there's a lot of research that's free behind that. Guy, if you look at that a little bit more, the person who developed that, Alex Lindley, he's done a lot of research on positive psychology and strength, the value of building on strength. And then also I just put a link here to an article on strength-based approach to coaching mental toughness. Sandy Gordon was the first author on that one, and that's a nice, they did that with athletes, but it fits really well for coaches too in terms of looking at how we can build our coaching ability through focusing on strength. And we started to do this. I've seen this with our U.S. Olympic coaches and some of the programs we have, some of the questions we might ask in terms of our strength, and getting it really specific to looking at things like what most energizes you as a coach. You know, what was your best day of coaching this past season, and why? Why was this the best day? This really taps into passion and drive and motivation. Let's do more of that. And let's figure out how we can create an environment where we do that on a more regular basis, right? Because when we're at our best, our athletes have a chance to be at their best, right? And we're in the process with Human Kinetics and Dr. Andy Gillum putting together an online evaluation, end-of-season evaluation toolkit, where we've tried to pull across all this different research and literature and examples from coaches and athletes to put something that could maybe provide a very simple, quick way to start this process of evaluation that includes feedback from athlete, coach, and administrator. And so what we've done is we've actually come up with 30 questions that we think, based on our research and the evidence, fits across any sport. And actually, we've developed these questions to be applicable or fit for a grade 5 reading level. So you could use this middle school, high school, college, let's say. And what's nice about it is that the questions are matched across the 3 stakeholders. So you see here sample questions. So the athlete might get a question that says, my coach helped me become a better athlete. Well, that is then translated for the coach, the same type of question, I help my athletes improve, or my players improve as athletes. And then the AD gets a similar version of the question, but specific to their vantage point. The coach helped the athletes get better. And it goes through 30 questions like this, and then we can compare the feedback across the 3 different stakeholders, and it covers what we think are the main elements of quality coaching. And this will be released in a few months. We're pilot testing it right now. So that's what I wanted to share with you today. Just take a few minutes to go over some things that I found to be helpful in the work in terms of end-of-season coaching, specifically program evaluation, some rituals and recognition strategies, and then coach performance analysis. Thank you.
Wade, thank you again so much for the time and effort that you put into compiling all this information and sharing it with you. I know it was beneficial for our audience today in their future coaching endeavors. And we only had 1 or 2 questions come in here, so if we have time to handle those, I think I can serve those up to you at this time. First one really deals with, we talked about program evaluation early in the presentation, looking at it 360 almost, getting feedback from a number of different individuals involved in sport programs and really kind of assessing the success of my sport program looking back over this season. This one is, I know you mentioned bringing parents into that equation, and that seems to be a recurring question that comes up in a number of these webinars, but in soliciting feedback from parents, whether it's a coach evaluation or a program evaluation, are there any dynamics that perhaps need to be looked at in soliciting that feedback from parents?
Well, I think it comes back to what is the purpose of this activity, and what, is it done in the right spirit? So my experience has been that, the parents who are upset will want their voice to be heard, and they'll write a lot, and they'll all be negative. And the majority of the people really won't have anything to say. They're either disinterested or they're fine. So then if you just look at the 3 evaluations you get back, and you say, oh my gosh, this was awful, because they're all negative. But you have 25 that didn't respond or said, yeah, I was fine. So I think the principle, right? Best principles. You want feedback from as many different stakeholders as possible, but they have to understand the spirit of the exercise. The spirit of the exercise is to help us improve and get better, not to make a judgment on someone's ability, right? And it's not final. It's not a summative type of exercise where you get a score and you get you get a rating, you're good or bad. It's more, here's a collection of information and data, if you will. And so looking at it holistically across these data points, what are the big pictures here? What are some things that we're doing well and some things we need to talk about?
Great, thank you, Wade. Here's another question, and we talked a lot about at the end of the season, sitting down, evaluating, reflecting on the past performance throughout the year. Is there any benefit, or perhaps you do this and it just wasn't touched on today, to periodically evaluate throughout the season instead of having one comprehensive evaluation at the end, having evaluations at certain points throughout the season? What do you think of that?
Yeah, that's the model for sure. That's ideal, but we have to be realistic about our time and resources. And so, yeah, we definitely want to be getting feedback and data and doing reflections and evaluations throughout the season, all year, not just season, all year, all 4 phases. But at minimum, we need to have a system in place that's meaningful and practical for us to use at the end of season. So I think of a typical high school or college athletic director, and you might have, in this case, 23 sports. That's that's a lot of moving parts and different seasons, of course. So they're all in these end of season moments at different points in the year. And so, realistically, to expect a coach or an AD to be able to collect meaningful evaluation feedback throughout the year, that's going to depend on your context. But I haven't seen too many places where they've been able to do that. But I'm sure there's definitely ways to do that if you really want to make it a priority. For example, one of the coaches one of the ADs I was speaking with last week actually said, he makes it a priority every single day to have personal communication with each head coach that's in season. So there might be, 5 winter sports. So every day it's a text or a phone call or a visit with each of those 5 coaches. So those are the coaches when they're in season who that's the richest point for getting evaluation feedback and data. So that's a way, he's not recording things, it's not reflection sheets, it's not questionnaires, it's a personal touch. And that's a way for him to at least have some sense of what's going on a regular basis.
Well, great. Wade, we're up against our time limitations, so again, we just thank you so much for all of the effort and time and expertise that you put into presenting these webinars for us. It's very much appreciated, and I'm sure our audience members will find it beneficial in their coaching down the road. So again, thank you for that. For our audience members today, later today you'll receive an email from me containing a link to the recording of today's webinar. In addition to that, I'll include a link to the PowerPoint slides. For those of you who had questions regarding that, those will be available through the website later today, so look for that email from me coming later. I do also want to thank once again the Coaches Insider, Wade Coaches Directory, for all their work in promoting our webinar series. So thanks to the Coaches Insider. I do want to draw attention to the fact that for participating today, you do receive a 30% discount on Wade's forthcoming book, Coaching Better Every Season. So when you come to the Human Kinetics website, use promo code G588 at checkout, and you'll receive the 30% discount. You can pre-order that book right now at humankinetics.com. That book will be available next month, probably mid-month, I would say. If not before that. So you can pre-order the book through humankinetics.com right now. I do also want to mention the fact that Wade has one more webinar in the series coming up in December, so mark your calendar for Wednesday, December the 14th for the final installment, Off-Season Recharging and Improving for Next Year. So mark your calendars and look for registration information coming from Human Kinetics Coach Education in the next week or so. You can always come to our website and access that information through the webinars area and register for upcoming webinars, as well as access recorded webinars through that area of our website. At this point, I'm going to stop the recording. Again, thank you very much for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you in December at the fourth and final webinar in the series. Thank you.